Well, when life suddenly sends you lemons, you can do a few things. But in the case of the thing we're going to talk about today, you better take real good care of them. Let's get into it. Taxonomically, the genus Cubaris was erected by Brandt way back in 1833. And currently, there are 104 listed species globally. Now, most of the undescribed species that we know in the trade, such as the lemon blue, amber, Jupiter, rubber duckies, and the myriad of other goofy names that are named as Cubaris. However, truth be told, once some true taxonomic work is actually done with these species, now somewhat being thrust into the spotlight, we would be expecting an absolute multitude of taxonomic changes. These have all been categorized as Cubaris solely because this would be the closest genera that they conform to. Now, the species in question today, this striking lemon blue, is of Thai origin. But honestly, any other more specific location data is just simply not readily available. Not only for this species, but pretty much all these species being sold as Cubaris with all these fancy names in the trade. The truth is, the collectors of these species never want to offer their source. And there's new species, all sorts of fancy new species of beautiful, not only Cubaris, in quotes, but also all sorts of all stunning isopods coming into the trade seemingly weekly. Collectors are paying absolute top dollar to be the first to own, keep, and hopefully successfully breed them in captivity. A lot of these isopods are insanely expensive. Rubber duckies, you go back a year ago, rubber duckies for a culture was $300 for 10. Now it's starting to drop somewhat because more and more people are having success and they're able to start meeting that demand. Lemon blues are still far higher in price because they just do not replicate at the same rate as some of the others. Maybe one day somebody will be extremely successful with them and figure out that little piece of the puzzle that gives them the reproductive rate super high compared to a lot of the other species. Now, most of the Asian Cubaris, again in quotes, cave-dwelling species, are somewhat forgiving in their care, as long as some of the basic cultural requirements are taken. Because they are kept more moist or humid than a lot of the other genera, I strongly recommend the inclusion of springtails in their enclosure. I find this is of critical importance in maintaining a healthy environment and reducing spoilage of feed by them consuming mold. The care for Cubaris species lemon blue is pretty straightforward if you're experienced in keeping any of the Cubaris species. As it's more of a pricier species than a lot of the basic ones, I wouldn't start out with them right off the bat. But they're not as reclusive as, say, perhaps rubber duckies. Now, if we look at the enclosure as a whole, you'll notice I have ventilation on one side, and I also have ventilation on the other side. It provides a nice, good air movement. Cubaris as a whole, most of the species, or at least a lot of the species, come from limestone caves. So the addition of a lot more calcium in the environment, as well as the humidity in the environment, it should be a little bit higher. So I use cork bark, and there's some adults hanging out on the cork bark right there. And there's some adults down there. I use little pieces of salvaged rotting wood with mosses and lichens from the forest. There's another one right there. And then there's a young one coming up. They're all through the enclosure. And then I also generally use lots of pieces of oak bark. And there's a couple of young ones with mum. Now the other thing you'll notice in the enclosures is pretty standard. Most people tend to have a moist area at the back, or at least a third to a half of the moist area. This one here, because of the way that the ventilation is done on these ones, and I'm doing experiments, as you guys know, I'm always experimenting, trying to find out what works best for me. And for Cubaris, I use the same sort of setup as I'm using this one for several of the other species of Cubaris Lemon, as well as my Rubber Duckies. Ideally, I think I would like to have a slightly deeper substrate so they can really, really go down into it, but then there's the other side of the coin where you may never see them. So the mixture is the same mixture that I use for all my other isopods. However, there's a lot more addition of the calcium carbonate, which I've shown you, as well as not just the cuttle bone, but also lots of pieces of eggshell and aspects of different things of limestone that I put into here. I've used things as coralline rock, dead live rock, you can buy at your aquarium stores, limestone, things like that. Anything that is be able to form a calcium source for them. Still using the leaf litter. But you got to bear in mind, being a species coming from a limestone cave, they would probably not really see much leaf litter. The only thing on the floor of the cave would probably be bat guano. So, but overall, it's not much different than a lot of the other enclosures, other than the fact that the moisture through this enclosure is a bit more evenly dispersed. There are still some dry areas down this side, going gradually wetter as we go on. But the reality is I find them in all areas of this enclosure. There's not one spot that they tend to favor. They are generally all over the place. They are much slower to reproduce than a lot of the other Cubaris species, at least for me. Possibly your experiences may differ. But overall, I don't treat these any differently outside of the conditions I've mentioned. I still do my weekly maintenance the same as I do for all my other isopods. It's just this one here tends to be a little bit wetter. I keep them a little bit wetter. Now when it comes to diet, let's take a peek at that. Now as far as dietary components go, for this particular type of species, and most Cubaris in general, I find that they tend to have higher protein requirements, similar to some of the Porcilios. So I do still use a variety. This is a generic fish pellet. A fish pellet or a fish flake. Any good quality fish pellet or fish flake would probably meet the needs of almost any of these species, which are true detritivores. I do use dried minnows occasionally, just to really up the protein source, but most true fish foods are going to be made with fish meal anyways, it has a large component. This here is one of my tried and true. These are those large, what we call nuggets. Paisley likes using these because it's a good quality fish food. This is actually a koi food. It's a good quality food. It's mostly vegetable based with a bit of fish meal, and it goes directly into the source. It's all ready to go in a nice, easy to deliver package. And then you guys have also seen me using other things such as the Rapashi products. Well, Soylent Green, you can buy it in much larger quantities. This is the one made for fish, but it is the identical one as the Rapashi Morning Wood, which is made for isopods. Same product. But I also do add in ones like grub pie and some of the other ones to add a bit more protein variety to their diet. But overall, care for them, for most Cubaris species, other than that initial expense and them being much more slow to replicate, they're not really much different than a lot of the other species, and I find them very rewarding. Well, Rubber Duckies, they sure took the spotlight when they first came onto the scene. Nobody could deny the cuteness factor of this outstanding species. But with the discovery of many more isopod species, a lot of these Asian Cubaris types, such as beautiful lemon blue, these things are here to stay. And if we take good care of them, we can get a lot of reproduction from them. We can get them out to more and more people. And more people can appreciate and enjoy these animals for the true beauties that they are. So with that, my friends, Thank you kindly for watching as always and supporting. If you wish, become a member of my channel. But please make sure you subscribe, ring that little notification bell. You'll always be kept up to date when I upload new content. Until next time, my friends, stay safe.